Hello and welcome to yet another build guide video, this time with Gladiator, Lacerate of Haemorrhage, the Immortal build. Basically in 3.25, GGG decided they wanted to bring in something called block chances lucky, and this monstrosity has been born. In this video I will explain the whole breakdown, everything about the build, how it works, where it works, the different ways how you can craft, and so on. Of course, this is all beginner friendly as well. Just one little disclaimer at the beginning: this build does not do that much damage. I'll repeat, this build does not do that much damage. This build is optimized to tank hits. This build has a problem with dots on the ground, especially ultimatum, physical dot on the ground after buzzsaws, and you have been warned. Now, when it comes to the build, I will go a little bit different this time around. I will go with the Ascendancy first. So the Ascendancy is called the Gladiator. The Gladiator received a rework in 3.25 and now it has been changed. Now for Ascendancy, we are going to choose Gratuitous Violence, which bleeding enemies you kill explode, dealing 20% of their max life as physical damage. And we are doing bleeding, of course. We're going to go with Determined Survivor, gain 50% chance to block from equipped shield instead of the shield's value. So whatever the shield has, it doesn't matter. This one gives it 50%. And then chance to block attack or spell damage is lucky if you blocked recently. What does that mean? Lucky rolls means anything that happens is rolled twice. So as an example, if we have 78% chance to block, which we currently have in the build, when we get an attack hit that is getting duplicated into two rolls, and let's say the first roll hits us, the second roll gets blocked. Because it's lucky, it's going to favor the block one, so we are going to block the hit. It's very rare that we get hit. This effectively puts block at 95% chance, because once it rolls it twice, it's really difficult for it to not be blocked. Yes, we still don't block, that's why we need to beef up a little bit, but this is quite frankly insanity when it comes to defense, and it most likely will get a nerf. Now, the last Ascendancy we take is War of Attrition. Because we don't do any damage, this helps us deal more damage. Deal 1% more damage with hits and ailments to rare and unique enemies for each second they've been in your presence, up to a maximum of 100%, which basically means the more we fight with enemies, double damage we are going to deal. So we are going to deal up to double damage after, what is that, minute and a half, a little bit more, which is going to happen, nothing to worry about. The other Ascendancies, there's no need to check them. This one gives us 30% more damage on enemies while they're on low life. The bleeding you inflict is aggravated. We don't need that as we apply 8 anyways. And Measure Retaliation, we do not use retaliation skills. Retaliation is something new that they have added in the game. But without further ado, let's go to our POB. As per usual with my builds and everything is sorted by actual like acts and then later on numbers. So how you do with the build, how you go through the campaign, what points you should pick up, how you should pick them up and such, all is sorted there in the POB. Now, Act 1 through 10, what you need to do, what you need to pick and such, and then items through Act 10, and then white maps and so on. Now, let's go and let's talk about the skill itself before I go on and talk specifics. Now, the skill itself is called Lacerate. Lacerate does 2 slashes that we have, and depending whether we are in a sand stance or in a blood stance, it changes its damage, it changes its AoE and such. Now, those 2 slashes, as you can see, they are yellow now, and they are red now. That's stance switching. What are stances? Stances are, there are only 2 gems for stances. One is Flesh and Stone, and one is Blood and Sand. Those 2 can be purchased via vendor. So Blood and Sand is here. Blood and Sand is here. So it is 10% mana reservation, but melee skills deal more area damage while in Blood Stance, and they have 5% less area of effect. But if in Sand Stance, more area of effect and less area damage. Now, that is going to be something that we are going to use on a regular Lacerate, as regular Lacerate gains bonuses from it. But keep in mind, this is also an aura. Lacerate says this: slashes twice, releasing waves of force that damage enemies they hit. Enemies in the middle can be hit by both. The slashes will have a chance to inflict bleeding in Blood Stance or have a wider angle in Sand Stance. Now, 50% more damage with bleeding while in Blood Stance and 25% chance to cause bleeding while in Blood Stance, but 50% increased angle while in Sand Stance. So technically, you should be playing in Sand Stance while you're doing mapping, and while you're doing bossing, you should swap to Blood Stance. We get stances by Blood and Sand, and another one, which is Flesh and Stone. Flesh and Stone is 25 up from 10% mana reservation aura, which buffs us and affects nearby enemies with an aura differently depending on the stance. So base aura radius is 2.8 meters. It has increased cooldown recovery rate, so we can swap through each stance. And while in Blood Stance, aura makes enemies take up to 20% more physical damage from hits, not from bleeding, from hits. And while in Sand Stance, buff makes you take up to 20% less damage from enemies in aura. Now, my recommendation throughout the leveling is to go with Blood and Sand, regular one, 10% mana reservation, as that is going to enable the use of Lacerate. How it's going to go well. So if you don't have any aura, or if you don't have any stance, it's going to default to red one. But the moment you put one on, it's going to swap to its own thing. Now, once you finish leveling and such, you are going to be greeted with Lacerate of Haemorrhage. Well, once you finish leveling, once you collect enough currency to buy Lacerate of Haemorrhage, or you run through the lab and get it as well. Lacerate of Haemorrhage does this: slashes twice, releasing waves of force that damage enemies they hit. Enemies in the middle can be hit by both. And this one is pure bleeding Lacerate. That's why it's Haemorrhage. More damage with bleeding and chance to cause bleeding. So when you put that one, regardless of your stance, is always red. Although this is with an empty Exon, it's always red, regardless of your stance. With the Lacerate of Haemorrhage, once you swap to it, we do not have to worry about being in Sand or Blood Stance. We just swap to Flesh and Stone, and we just go to Sand Stance, and we take less damage in general. So that's basically it. When it comes to support gems, we have just the bog standard for melee. Melee physical damage support. These are awakened versions. You can use the regular ones. We are going with Brutality to do more damage, more physical damage. We're going with Volatility to deal more maximum damage. And we're going with Multi-Strike. Multi-Strike makes our ability repeat. One button press, multiple repeats. One button press, multiple repeats. And we have Swift Affliction that makes our bleeding deal more damage, basically, and have less duration, which means more damage in general. Now, when it comes to everything, you can use the awakened versions of the gems, or you can just forgo them. Completely fine. Just don't buy awakened multi-strike. It's too expensive. Now, to explain how volatility works, we have Ryslatha's Coil, which gives us more maximum physical attack damage, which basically means this: whenever we apply a bleed, that bleed gets damaged from the hit and the bleeding modifiers, and it can either be overridden with a stronger bleed, or it expires if you apply only smaller bleeds. So basically, on average, we are going to deal, this one has 60 more, this one has 45 more, so 105 more maximum, and then we have 70 less and 36 less, 106 less. So if we have 100 damage hit, we're basically going to go through 0 and 200. On average, you're going to hit 100 or higher, but because of the duration of the bleed and how bleeding works, you can override the bleed that's on an enemy with a stronger bleed. Now, for that, we are also using something called Crimson Dance. Usually, you can only apply one bleed. And then that bleed can be either aggravated or not, which basically means that enemies will take more damage like they're moving. So when enemies move, they take more damage from bleeding. Crimson Dance makes us apply 8 bleeds, but we deal 50% less damage with bleeding, and the bleeding does not deal extra damage while the enemy is moving and cannot be aggravated. Regular bleed, when it's applied once, of course has normal damage, but when aggravated or when enemy is moving, it deals another 2x of the damage, totaling 3x, while Crimson Dance deals up to 4x of the damage because it's all additive. So we can deal up to 4 times the damage, including everything like a base plus Crimson Dance, with bleeding for Crimson Dance if we can apply those 8 bleeds. Thankfully, because every slash counts as an application and we have multi-strike, we apply 2, 4, 6. We apply 6 and then you can just hold the button, spam it, and that's basically it. We are always applying 8 minimum. Awaken Multi-Strike adds another 2 slashes, but Awaken Multi-Strike is 5 or 6 times more expensive than the whole build. Okay, now that that's settled, let me explain the gear. So for gear, I will explain my current gear, so you guys don't get frustrated about things, and I will explain the build upgrade path. We are working with Jack the Axe. Jack the Axe is an extremely good item that gives us damage over time multiplier for bleeding from hits with this weapon, which basically gives us another 34-35% at max roll damage over time multiplier for bleeding. It gives us chance to cause bleeding on hit, added physical damage and increased physical damage by itself, and it gives us level 20 Thirst for Blood skill. Now, Thirst for Blood skill is an aura that we can activate that reserves life. And it says this: reserves some of your life to cause bleeding you inflict to be stronger and grant life regeneration based on the number of bleeding enemies nearby. So we get 20% more damage with bleeding. It applies beams to the closest 5 nearby bleeding enemies, and we regenerate 400 life per second for each affected enemy. That's, I wanted to say 4,000 life. We regenerate 400 life per second. So if we have 5 enemies, that's 2k life per second. We have 4.2k life. That means our life gets full in 2 seconds. But when it comes to Thirst for Blood, it does take 10% of our life less with reservation efficiency and such. But that's an incredibly good tool that we can use to actually sustain things. Of course, on one target, we have 400 life per second. Okay, next we have the Surrender Azomite Tower Shield. Surrender is a shield that gives us life when we block. It has been technically nerfed from previous leagues. Previous leagues, it had like a retaliate skill, which now it doesn't, but it has high life recovery when you block. You want above 300, 400 life when we block, as we are going to block all the time. Now, that's very, very potent because we can actually regen an insane amount of life, 467 on this one, for basically nothing. So when we block, and it has very, very good armor. How do we get this shield? We can either buy it from trade, we can farm Ulnetol's Breach Stones and drop the previous version, which is called the Anticipation, and then we can use Blessing of Ulnetol to make it the Surrender. I have done all the things in the POB, so everything is written. You can just read it there. You can use the search or the trade link. You can find it, you can buy it. It's cheaper to buy Anticipation and then upgrade to Surrender, but if you want to buy the Surrender directly, you can do so. Ryslatha's coil, I did explain how it is, but that's the BIS. You can buy any Ryslatha coil. Just look that it has as low less and as high more as you possibly can afford. Okay, let's go through the regular gear because everything else is crafted, and this time around I have spent a lot of time to teach you guys how to craft. For every single item in the build, besides cluster jewels, as those are 20 chaos, you can expect a crafting guide here. I will talk about that now. So we are crafting a lot of gear: boots, helmet, body armor, gloves, amulet, ring, and second ring. So we are basically crafting everything. Now, I have explained these here. I won't go into too much detail, as you have seen my crafting guide so far. This basically uses the same thing. So for boots, we have ailment immunity boots. For helmet, we have mana reservation efficiency helmet. For body armor, we have chaos resistance body armor, gloves, chaos resistance and attack speed. Amulet, we have dexterity amulet with resistances in life. We have curse ring for harvest craft. This one is important. You can watch my YouTube short about how to do it. It's very, very simple. For the second ring, we basically buy a regular ring, which I have here, and then we do beast crafting. So for beast crafting, I will spend a little bit of time. When we get the beasts, when we buy the beasts, we go to menagerie. In the menagerie, we're going to go to Blood Altar, and we are going to choose 30 aspect of the spider skull. And that's how we craft it. Don't worry, everything is written in the guide for your leisure to do so. Next, when you get resistances on your gear, you can use Horticrafting Station to change resistance on your gear, from cold to fire, lightning to fire, and so on. All the variations are there other than chaos. So that's why we want to lock in chaos with fractured modifiers. Fractured modifiers are these golden modifiers that cannot be modified in any way, shape, or form. So be careful when you buy items. I have explained and added links to what you can buy, what you can expect and such, so nothing to worry about. For white sockets on the items, we can use Omen of Blanching, and we have that here. So that covers all the crafts. Now let's go for each item. When you are playing the game and when you get to like white maps, so you don't want to do anything else, you just want to upgrade as you go, we still have the Jack the Axe, but we have Lionized Remorse, which is just a basic, very, very cheap shield that we can use, which is also great for defenses, but of course Bis is Bis. This is very good for your start. It's a very, very cheap build to start. It can start with like 30, 40, 50 chaos, completely easy, and you can find that using the Chaos Orb recipe. Perfectly fine as a build to start with regular Lacerate, and then you can work towards getting Lacerate of Haemorrhage. Next, for the helmet, you just want some stat sticks. Helmet, stat stick, gloves, boots, amulets. Keep in mind we need intelligence and dexterity in this build, and you just need some resistances. For curse ring, we can get a very cheap mark of submission ring, and you just put vulnerability inside and you have it until you make your own ring. And if you have an extra chaos, you just buy Belt of the Deceiver, which is a good physical damage belt. Now, when it comes to body armor, I will always recommend this in any of my guides. That is, buy any body armor, any 6-link body armor, doesn't matter what it is, as long as it has your colors and your required stats. We require like armor, we can go armor evasion, but it's better to have armor only. But this is very good for, especially in the beginning of the league, just to have a 6-link and you get some stats, because Tabula does not give us any stats. So that's what I would recommend. For anything else, you do not need that much. You just need one jewel here that gives us chance to block spell damage, intelligence, and life. You can forgo life, but we need intelligence and chance to block spell damage. That caps us. And we need a cluster jewel. We will need 2 of these. They are axe attacks, and axe and sword attacks deal damage with increased damage with hits and ailments, and the 3 points that we need are Fuel the Fight, Smite the Weak, and Wound Aggravation. Fuel the Fight gives us attack speed, mana leech, and more damage while leeching, well, increased damage while leeching, sorry. Smite the Weak we are not going to use, so it's attack damage against maimed enemies, and we have chance to maim. And Wound Aggravation is good for ailments. Axe or sword attacks deal increased damage with ailments, increased physical damage with axes and swords, and 5% to phase over time multiplier while wielding an axe or a sword. That's basically was giving us a little bit of damage. You want 2 of these in the build in the end game. But that's just the basics. Then when we go into yellow maps, this is where I fully expect you guys to swap to Lacerate of Haemorrhage, and that's what I did. Now here we've done some cheap upgrades that we can do. We've done the Blue Nightmare, which is now around 30 Chaos. It's up to 1 Divine. It is a jewel that transforms our points to something else, or it adds something else to the points. Passives granting lightning resistance or all ally resistances in radius also grant chance to block spell damage at 50% of its value. Now we have here a cluster that has elemental resistances, block spell damage, ally resistances, block attack damage, and here block attack damage, block spell damage. It doesn't show in the POB even though it calculates it, but it does show in game. +2, +1, +1, and +1 when it comes to +4 when it comes to getting like the spell block. It's a very, very good use of just a very small jewel that we can. And that's what also gives us more spell block. Now, when it comes to everything else, there's nothing much that changed here, just like fill in your stat sticks, and that's basically it. Now, when we swap to the first 10 Divine investment, this can be in red maps or before, I have done something different in this POB other than what I did before. This time, I want to showcase what are the changes for the investment in the build, so you just don't wander around and just look aimlessly in the POB. So in this POB here, and depending on if you guys like it, I might do it for the next ones, I'm basically saying, okay, you're spending around 10 Divine investment for this gear. What are the changes? The changes are Ailment Immunity Boots, Storm Shroud, Thread of Hope, and Reservation Cluster. So anything that's added from the previous one is what we add in the build. Now the reason for it is this. It is a little bit of a complex build, but it has a steady progression curve. With every few divines that you invest, you are getting that much stronger. I am doing it in increments of 10 because 10 divines are not impossible to collect, especially with this build as we are doing Ultimatum, and Ultimatum does bring in some currency at least. Now, when it comes to the small cluster, it's uncompromising, which gives us mana reservation efficiency for determination, and we get 3 points, and those give us mana reservation efficiency of skills. We also want 25% increased effect. It's around 80 chaos, and this one basically is linked as well in the notes section, in the item notes section. So you can just copy paste that one when you edit the item. Thread of Hope is a very, very good jewel that we can use, and that is a jewel that affects passives in a certain ring. It can go from small to massive ring. We are currently using large ring, and you can see it with this like blue thing. Any passive that is in that circle can be allocated without any other connections. And this one also has a negative to it, which is from -10 to -20 to all elemental resistances. The higher number you want, well, the less resistance you want to lose, the more expensive the jewel becomes. We can handle up to 15 if I'm not mistaken on this build, but having a 12 or 13 is perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to passives that we get there, we get Art of the Gladiator, which gives us attack speed, global accuracy, Seasoned Swordplay to fit in mana reservation efficiency for the stance skills, Deflection to get chance to block attack damage and endurance charges when we block. We are also getting a Rage. Every Rage also grants increased armor and 3 Rage when being hit by an enemy. And we are getting 30% increased armor and evasion rating while fortified, basically just armor, and fortifying hits grant increased fortification, which is technically irrelevant. We are taking this for 30% increased armor. Now, this is very useful to use later, as we have some points that we are respecking here and there, but overall, this is going to help us with survivability and with damage a little bit, as we can fit in more auras. One more thing that's very important is that corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you on the protection master is here, and we can use different resistances depending on what you need. So you either go with lightning or you go with cold, so that's on you. Now, one big thing is, how are we getting our accuracy? Because every hit needs accuracy. We're using Resolute Technique. Resolute Technique says your hits can't be evaded, but we can never deal critical strikes. So that's how we get it. We get it in like Act 3 or so. We can path to it, and then later on we just keep it, as we do not need to worry about accuracy. Okay, for the next 10 divine investment, I'm going to show you this. So we are going to go with crafted helmet, body armor, and gloves. Keep in mind, that's Jack the Axe talking. So crafted helmet, body armor, and gloves is what we are doing next. And those, I have written a full guide here, so I don't spend the next 20 minutes explaining how to craft. The guide is pretty straightforward. Just follow it, you'll be fine. When it comes to another 5 to 10 divine investment, we have, keep in mind everything is labeled, we have Amulet, Einhar ring, and Curse and Hit ring, plus an Enlighten, but that's absolutely fine. Enlightens are like around 1 divine, 1.5 divine and now, which is not too expensive, but it helps us fit another aura in. That's also here in the notes section. So I've basically made it so that you just watch this video as a mini explanation, well, as an explanation, and then you can sit down and craft these items. You can always buy these items off the market, but my goal with this guide specifically is to teach beginners that crafting is not something that you need to have a PhD for. You can just easily go through it with just a little bit of currency. And then we have 5th Ascendancy point, which is only the Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh. So, and the cluster as well, because we lose fortification. We lose fortification and we get the cluster. That's going to give us Fortitude, and Fortitude is fortification. Here it gives us 15 stacks. Players take 1% less damage from hits per fortification. That's self-explanatory. When it comes to flasks, we are using a Terrified or Panicked flask. When we drop to half health, this refills 2k life or so, and immunity to bleeding and corrupted blood. We're using Granite for armor, with charges when you're hit by enemy, increased armor during effect, and of course use when charges reach full. Sulfur Flask, which gives us increased damage, which is negligent, but drops Consecrated Ground. Consecrated Ground is the ground that heals us, so that's this one. Grants life regeneration and reduces the effects of curses. And we, on that flask, want reduced effect of curses on you during effect, which effectively makes us curse immune while we are standing on consecrated ground. Basalt Flask gives us more armor and taunts nearby enemies on use, and we want to regenerate life per second during effect. And Silver Flask we want to have because of Onslaught, as that gives us attack speed. And we want damage taken from hits is leached as life during effect. I've also done in the notes, I've also written what we want in the notes and for what we need and for what we want, but that's also one little thing to worry about. When it comes to the Pantheon, Pantheon is one thing that gets spoken usually at the end of the video for builds. We want Soul of Lunaris because we gain 1 additional percent of physical damage reduction for each nearby enemy, and movement speed for each nearby enemy, which is irrelevant. Chance to avoid projectiles, reduced LA damage taken if you have been hit recently, which we have, avoid chained projectiles. And Tukohama to get additional physical damage reduction per second you've been stationary, and we are stationary a lot, and regenerate 2% of life per second while stationary. So we get a lot of physical damage reduction in general. Now, what would I recommend with this build? I would recommend with this build to go with Maven and Shaper Guardians. Shaper Guardians and Maven are pretty pretty good way of how you can do things with the build, as it doesn't care about almost anything. I have a regex as well in the POB, so nothing to worry about there. But you're basically standing still and you're just smacking the enemies until they die. So that's basically it. When it comes to other mechanics, we have Ultimatum as our main mechanic, but in Ultimatum we cannot do Protect the Altar that well, as enemies will still focus the altar even if we taunt them with the Flask. Currently, for the next mechanic, I am doing Einhar Beasts to finish the challenge, but I was doing strong boxes in the meantime with the cheapest scarabs. It can delve pretty well. It does Einhar Beasts, no problemo. It does Ritual, no problem. Guardians, any type of them, that's completely fine. I haven't done bosses, as it would just be a snore fest where you would just sit down and do bosses, and I will never recommend tier 17 maps as a thing for my guides. So that's basically it. There's also one last thing I would like to mention about the build, and that is extra thing for retaliation. Retaliation skills are a good addition to the game, but they need to be tuned in a different way. This build gets extra buttons compared to what it was the previous time. I will link the previous video in the description as well. But instead of actually using retaliation skills, we are now using War Banner. War Banner gives us increased accuracy, which is irrelevant, and we gain more physical damage with melee skills to you and allies. Now, when this has 50 Valor, which we gain by fighting enemies, it increases the aura effect. So 10% more aura effect per Valor, which gives us a significant chunk of damage boost. But that's basically it. I've dawdled way too much on this build guide. Keep in mind, one last thing is the build, the POB is going to show that we have an infinite hit pool. This is hit pool. This is not survivability in dots, burning ground, poison ground, and such. This is against hits. Most of the things in the game are hits. Oh yeah, this build is for Simulacrum as well. Keep in mind, if something passes through our block, which happens from time to time, if you die on this build, you would have died on any other build, basically. Now, on the other case, you have to pay attention about dot damage. I've tried as much as possible to optimize this build so it would be great, and it is doing now Simulacrum's deathless, fully deathless, but you need to learn what is a hit and what is a dot. And this build will help you learn that. That's why I cater this build to beginners, as you will slowly go through things and upgrade. Now, it is not a mapper, as it does not do open content well, but there are maps that can help you do that, like Guardian maps do the maps easily, like Guardian maps, Silo, any map that's like tight corridors. This build doesn't have any problems because of our AoE. If it's an open area, this build struggles to clean in a reasonable time. Reasonable time being less than 10 minutes. But otherwise, that is going to be it for this build guide. Keep in mind, everything is written in the POB. Please follow the POB. Please read the notes, as it can be very fiddly when people mix builds from two guide creators. So please don't mix builds. Read the notes carefully. Enjoy the video as is, as an explanation form, and you will be golden. Now, if you've liked the video, please do give it a like. Sub if you don't mind. Thank you so much for passing 1,500 subs. The road to 2K is next. I will be making new build guides and things soon and shortly. Just give me a little bit of time. But when it comes to everything else, you can visit my website, heavyheals.com. This build will be there as well. And I am thinking about ways on how to introduce crafting on the website, as well as a form of learning. So when it comes to everything else, if you have any questions, post them down in the comment below. Join the Discord. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video or stream. And I stream daily on Twitch and on YouTube. So have a good one.